Myanmar's government and Kachin rebels sign a deal that aims to lay the foundation for political dialogue and end the civil war in this region. But will this deal hold, and how can it boost efforts by Myanmar as it emerges from decades of civil war? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Veronica Pedrosa. Myanmar's government and separatist ethnic Kachin rebels have signed an agreement in what's being billed as a key step towards a ceasefire. The war in Kachin state's one of the world's longest-running insurgencies, and Myanmar's government's determined to see it put to rest as it tries to show the world it is committed to reform and civil rule. Under the new agreement, both sides have promised to work towards a nationwide ceasefire and new political dialogue. They also want to try to create, quote, a new political culture in Myanmar. The government will now discuss its activities and plans with the Kachin Independence Organisation, and they also agreed to try to address the urgent matter of resettling tens of thousands of displaced people, as well as reopening roads to Kachin state. Azhar Sukri has more.
This conflict was supposed to be over. A ceasefire held for 17 years, right up until June 2011, 2 months after the current nominally civilian government took over and started a peace process. The fighting's been sporadic and brutal, including airstrikes. This month, witnesses describe a steady push by the military. The United Nations estimates that there are about 100,000 people who have had to leave their homes and livelihoods because of the fighting. After this visit by the UN Secretary-General's Special Envoy, an aid convoy was allowed to reach a few camps for the first time in 18 months. But there are tens of thousands of people that aren't getting any help at all, and only a fifth of the UN's $50 million appeal has been funded. One of the most dangerous aspects for civilians are these. Ever since the ceasefire broke down, there have been persistent reports new landmines are being laid. Now, here's the proof.
This is our stronghold on the front line. I plant landmines for security. They protect our villages and defend our positions. This mine won't seriously harm anyone. They're just to warn off and scare our enemy.
At the front lines, the video evidence underlines the facts on the ground, despite the peace process and ceasefire. We managed to get an exclusive interview with one of the top Myanmar ministers negotiating with ethnic rebels across the country, and asked him if the military was listening to the civilian-led government.
You know, the military is the integral part of peace process. So, you know, military is under the command of our president or government. So military always are ready to follow all the mandate of our government, our president, or they are deeply involved in the peace process.
That isn't what the guns are saying. Some analysts point out that the drivers of the conflict are no longer about identity and national borders.
It appears as though the Myanmar military is trying to gain control of certain strategic areas. Most of these areas either involve lucrative natural resources or trade routes to China. So the roots of this conflict really are economic. This is not only an ethnic war, it's also a war about natural resources and access to those resources.
The Myanmar minister told Al Jazeera it is strongly committed to declaring nationwide ceasefires in the very near future. Everyone here wants to know what that really means. Azhar Sukri for Inside Story.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by three guests. From Kuala Lumpur, Maung Zani, a visiting fellow at London School of Economics. He's a commentator and expert on Burmese affairs. From Bangkok, Matthew Smith, Executive Director of Fortify Rights, a human rights agency specialising on Asia. You saw him in that report. And joining us from Singapore, Sourav Roy, Asian Affairs Analyst and columnist for Huffington Post. Thanks very much indeed to all of you gentlemen. I want to start with you, Sourav Roy, in Singapore. What do you think is the significance of this agreement that was reached today?
Well, the significance is it's very obvious that after 17 years of brutal fighting, they've at least come down to the common table of talking peace and of thinking of ceasefire. And I think it's really significant for Myanmar that the generals as well as the Kachin independent army are talking peace, and that would mean that at some point of time we could probably explore the option of amending the constitution perhaps, or perhaps, let's say, sharing of power, of resources and of vision and of foresight between the government and the rebels. And that would mean stability, and that would also mean looking towards an end of bloodshed, looking towards an end of hostility, and starting off a new political discourse.
Matthew Smith, you were recently in Kachin doing some research from a human rights perspective. What do people think about this agreement that was reached, do you think?
Well, I mean, at this point, there's very little trust on the ground for the behavior of the Burmese, of the Myanmar military. Right now, you've got over 100,000 people displaced. But beyond that, they've lost their homes, they've lost their livelihoods, they're living in camps that are seriously lacking in terms of humanitarian aid. The population density is a concern, education, livelihood. So it's quite a problem. But beyond that, there are still human rights violations taking place. We documented extrajudicial killings, forced labor. Civilian targets are being destroyed by the Myanmar army. This is as of just a few weeks ago, and there has been a mobilization of troops while these talks are happening. So there are very serious concerns on the ground.
Okay, Dr. Zania in Kuala Lumpur, if I can ask you, you specialise in the perspective of the Myanmar military. What do you think is really going on when an agreement like this is made?
Well, in the first place, we need to understand what the military construes as peace or ceasefire. For them, peace is almost surrender or peace on their own terms. And so I think in that sense, in the context of local Burmese military politics, not all ceasefire or not all peace agreements are virtuous or good in and of themselves. I worked with the Burmese military regime from 2004 to 2008, setting up track 2 negotiations between the Burmese regime and different entities outside, basically internationally. And the Burmese military regime was known to demand the maximum and unprepared to give even the bare minimum. That's why I think that all the previous ceasefire talks have broken down. In the case of the Kachin Independence Organization, this was an organization that reached the only written agreement 17 years ago. And mind you, we need to have an institutional memory when we look at the peace processes in Burma. The first peace process started in 1963. That was the year I was born, and I'm 50 now, and still we are talking about peace in the future.
Let's talk about the strategic importance of Kachin. It borders with China. There is an important pipeline that is to go through from China through Kachin State and go all the way to the west of Myanmar, to the border with India. Let me ask Sourav Roy about the strategic importance of getting to a ceasefire or a peace here.
Look, the strategic importance of ceasefire is understood, and there's no two doubts about it. And if you look at the complete picture in a holistic way, it's no longer about the army fighting the rebels. And if you go down to the grassroots levels in Burma, and I was in Burma in February earlier this year, people are tired of this bloodshed, whether it's from the army or whether it's from the rebels. And if you look at it, do the cause of the rebels really resonate with the people right now? You've got internally displaced people, you've got people who've lost everything, and at the end of the day they want stability and they want security. And I personally think that peace at this point of time, even if it's a start that has just begun right now, will only take them towards a direction that can augur good for Burma, and that can bring in some stability for Burma at some point of time.
Why this week? You know, like Thein Sein, president of Burma, is in Bandar Seri Begawan today, and then basically receiving the mandate from the ASEAN Association of Southeast Asian Nations for hosting or chairing the ASEAN for 2014. And so it is, I think it's it strikes me as very suspicious that the Burmese regime is, approaching this ceasefire from a public relations perspective rather than peace in and of themselves. You know,
what about this point, Sourav Roy? When you were,
I wouldn't agree to that. I wouldn't agree to that, Veronica, for the simple reason that if Myanmar has to chair ASEAN in 2014, and we all know that that's a huge step for Myanmar in terms of maintaining its position in ASEAN and showing that it is capable of leadership within the region, the release of prisoners from different parts of Myanmar, whether that is Bomo or whether that's areas such as Tipo or other areas such as Kanti, shows us that there is a concerted effort both from the generals at least, that they really want this peace process to be taken seriously throughout the nation. And we've heard before that the KIA spokespersons have said in support of this entire peace process that they want a common, unified federal state, and they want a federal union towards which they want to work towards peace. Just the fact that ASEAN and Burma happen to go hand in hand together, and Burma happens to be 2014 chairman, does not mean that it's going to be a PR exercise all the way down.
But don't you agree, Sourav Roy, that there is a big gap between what's going on the ground and what's going on in Myitkyina, where the agreement was made? And we did see a bit of a PR exercise. There was a photo opportunity that all looked very good.
Well, of course, there must be many things which are not in sync with what's happening on the ground and what's happening at the top level, but then we cannot afford to remain prisoners of history anymore. If there is a constructive step which has been taken towards a betterment of a nation which has internally displaced people, which has so many conflict and other issues inside, we need to support it and endorse it unconditionally, and not just keep on beating the past.
Mr. Rai, sorry to interrupt. Mr. Rai, sorry to interrupt. It sounds, like what you are saying sounds straight from the Ministry of Burmese Information, the rule book. And I have worked with them. I came from, military clan, and I worked with basically 3 successive heads of military intelligence services. I travel with the Karen rebels and live with them. And no one wants peace than the people in the war zone, more so than analysts like yourself or myself living in comfort in Kuala Lumpur. The reason that there is no peace or no serious ceasefire process beyond PR exercise over the past 50 years in Burma is because the Burmese military has broken the promise of ethnic equality on which the country of Burma was supposed to rest on as a post-colonial nation. And so I think you need to have a reality check. The fact is, some of the Burmese generals in power today, some of them are my own classmates, they are not listening to President Thein Sein. They are not listening to the main peace negotiator, Aung Min. Aung Min himself reportedly prefaces every single peace meeting, negotiations, that he has no control whatsoever over the Burmese armed forces. What more do you want?
Well, actually, we heard something completely contradictory, Zani, in that package, in that report by Ashar Sukri, when we had a quote from the immigration minister saying that the army and the civilian government are one.
If you look at President Thein Sein's words and their impact on the Burmese military's behavior on the ground in the conflict zone, you will see a total irreconcilable gap between what President has said he has ordered his troops to do and what his commanders in the conflict zones have been doing.
All right,
even
Saurabh.
this week, actually, as the peace process.
Let Saurabh get his point in, please.
Hello.
Well, why then, if that is such a big show and if it's such a big farce? And I do understand that there are a lot of disconnect between what's happening at the grassroots level and what's happening at the top level. But if that be all in all, then why is it that 14 of the 16 rebel groups have supported the ceasefire? Why is it that during the signing of this so-called peace agreement, we had 10 of those groups? We had the UN Special Envoy, Vijay Nambiar, and we had some of the biggest Chinese as well as Burmese officials over there to ensure that there is a direction which is going ahead. To just keep about saying that what's happening at the grassroots level and that what happened in the past will repeat itself is not giving future a chance, is not being future smart. And that's where I think that if there is a chance, then why not?
All
Even
right.
if the chance is the slightest.
Thank you. Matt, let's get back to this issue about the strategic importance of Kachin and where it is. When you were there, and I know you travelled right across the state, what sense did you get about whether Kachin is a victim of its geography?
Is that for me there, Veronica?
Yeah.
I think you raise an excellent point when you talked about the oil and gas pipelines that have been constructed from Western Myanmar up through Yunnan. This is a project that goes through an area that has been administered and controlled by the KIA, the Kachin Independence Army's 4th Brigade. And there have been quite a number of abuses in the vicinity of this project. There are multi-billion-dollar hydropower dams, very lucrative jade deposits at stake, mineral mines, anything from gold to rare earth metals. So there are very sizable economic interests at stake. And when the government says, and I would agree with the government spokesperson when he says what's needed is a new political culture, I would agree with that completely. However, I think what has to be a part of that political culture is accountability, namely accountability for the human rights violations that have been committed in Kachin State. Everything from forced labor, abusive forced labor on the front lines, to extrajudicial killings, civilians being targeted. There's been complete impunity in the state. And I think this is not being discussed right now with respect to the peace talks, and I think that's a mistake. The people of Kachin State have been denied justice. They've been displaced. They've been under attack. Landmines, as was mentioned in the piece that we just saw, are a very big problem right now in Kachin State. They're still being laid by both sides. Child soldiers are still being used and recruited by both sides, both parties to this conflict. So there are very serious human rights problems that frankly are just not being addressed right now.
And yet there is talk that President Thein Sein may be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. We just talked about the ASEAN chairmanship going to Myanmar in 2014. Is this a question of conflicting narratives? How can the picture that Matt's talking about coexist with these really kind of historic diplomatic victories for a government that has been isolated for so long? Saurabh?
Well, I'd just like to start answering that by saying, do we want to go back to the time when President Barack Obama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize? And we see what's happening around the world right now. We saw what happened in the Middle East as well. And coming back to the point of the whole peace process, it's not about a Nobel Prize. It's not about the fights. And I do recognize that there have been violations in the past. But what I'm trying to say is that it's time to move ahead. It's time to give a chance to the people of Burma and all those who've been wronged in the past. This is their chance. This is their springboard for discussions. And this is the chance to strike a negotiation. And that will happen not from the barrel of the gun, but that will happen when you come to the table, when you talk with the agencies who want to engage with you in a discussion.
Well,
yeah, go ahead, Johnny.
Mr. Roy, you sound like you love Burma more than I do. I gave up my entire family to push for change for the past 26 years, and I'm still outside the country, not seeing my own family. And then so, it's preposterous to say in the presence of a Burmese exile of 25 years that like give Burmese people a chance and have them, let them have peace. I'm sorry, that is too preposterous for me to take. The fact of the matter is, the key to lasting peace and the credible ceasefire negotiation is in the hands of the Burmese military. If you look at all the armed conflict zones of Burma, they are all strategically located border areas so rich in underground and above ground natural resources, including gold, jade, tungsten, uranium, and fertile and virgin commercializable land. So that's where the international community, such as China, UN, European Union, Norway, and other conflict mediators from different countries come in. They want to transform these war zones into commercially profitable, lucrative development projects. That's why they are pushing and helping the Burmese military put a pro-peace spin, while the Burmese military is not committed to peace in and of itself.
Look, the Myanmar government has a pretty uncertain relationship with China at times. It is, Matt Smith, if I could ask you what your sense was of China's interest in what happens in Kachin.
China has a very large interest in the outcomes of the war, a very large economic interest in the outcomes of this conflict. There are lucrative mines, as I mentioned, multi-billion-dollar investments by Chinese firms in the conflict zone. So large-scale agricultural projects. There are a wide number of economic interests throughout, and so there is this economic element that has driven the conflict, and I think there is a risk when these large amounts of money are at stake, when large economic interests are at stake. There is a risk that those will influence the decision making of the elite negotiators, and I think this is a concern. I think everybody in Kachin State, everybody in Myanmar wants peace in Kachin State. I don't think that's a question at all. I mean,
all right.
Really, what's happening right now? Yeah, sure.
We're running out of time. Sorry, if I could turn now to Surav Roy for your last comment on the situation in Kachin, and ask you what you think the real test of this process could be.
Well, the process has begun, and it does not have to be stopped either by ideologies or because of being prisoners of the past or of history. And as far as the point that Mr. Zani raised before about the European Union's interaction with Burma is concerned, WikiLeaks has clearly proven to us before that the European Union in its internal memo said if Burma becomes the chairman of ASEAN, it'll stop engaging or it'll not engage with it anymore. But I think that's counterproductive. I think everybody needs to engage with Burma, including its own people, its general, and the rebels. And that's where peace is important only for the people of Burma. And what's happened in the past, we need to let it go by. Bygones should be bygones.
All right, Zani.
Well, the real test is the Burmese military consenting to the demands of different ethnic armed groups, especially Kachin, Karen, Shan, and Karenni, that the Burmese troops withdraw from the ethnic armed conflict zones because they have renounced the original goal of secession and independent states from Burma. And they all want to live in the same federal union, providing that there is ethnic equality enshrined as the foundation. As long as the Burmese military and its troops are seen as occupying powers, there will not be peace. So the first and most clearest sign should be withdrawal of troops from these ethnic armed conflict zones.
All right, thank you very much indeed to our guests, Maung Zani, Matthew Smith and Surav Roy. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want, send us your feedback. Email your thoughts to insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks again for watching. Goodbye for now.